Hello and welcome to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast, a resilience podcast where we talk about all the challenging things that we're working to overcome, like anxiety, health, and relationship issues. My name is Sarah. So welcome to another edition of the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. I'm Sarah and really excited to connect with you again this week. This week we're going to go back into the parenting sphere and then also focus on parenting children with illnesses or disorders, and in this case, very specifically with PANDAS PANS. So I wanted to bring this episode to you at this time of year because October 9th is PANDAS PANS Awareness Day. So PANDAS and PANS I've talked about a lot on the podcast, interviewing different experts, different parents that have experience with PANDAS PANS. PANDAS is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections, and PANS is kind of the more umbrella term for pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome. These disorders are very near and dear to me. I've talked a lot about my own family's experience with them, and I really wanted to try to get something out there this week that would focus on PANDAS and PANS, and I have a great guest that is going to help me to do that this week. We know with these disorders that you can see symptoms exhibited like tics, OCD, anxiety, aggression, regression, and more. So today we are going to chat with a mother who is joining us, who is now an author as well. And she is going to talk with us about a new book that she's written called The Parent Survival Guide to PANDAS PANS, which is available now. So this mother is Deborah Marcus, and she's going to talk to us about her book and her experience. I also just wanted to take a minute to highlight all of the great work that is still happening in the PANDAS PANS community around bringing attention to these disorders. In the U.S., there are a number of organizations working to bring attention and move the needle in terms of PANDAS PANS, including Aspire. You can see their website at aspire.care. Last year for PANDAS PANS Awareness Day, I had Gabriella True on the podcast, who is leading Aspire and did a great job to really talk about her experience with the disorders as well as what Aspire is doing. Also, there are a number of other organizations that you can, I'm sure, find through Google. Be great to look at. And then in Canada, we've also had a new organization come to light this year. It's called the Inflamed Brain Alliance. This organization is headed up by Marnie and Richard Deshane, who I also interviewed probably a few years back now at this point on the podcast, giving their parental experience with PANDAS PANS. And so you can check out the website for Inflamed Brain Alliance. It's inflamedbrain.org, and take a look at some of the great initiatives that this organization is heading up in Canada, but I'm sure there's resources for everyone on there. Also, one of the neat things that they are doing this year is to bring awareness to PANDAS PANS, and that's a landmark lighting campaign. So asking for specific landmarks throughout the country of Canada to light up red for PANDAS PANS Awareness Day. I know there are a few that are going to be lit up red in Alberta, and then recently we've learned in Ontario the CN Tower will light up red for PANDAS PANS Awareness Day on October 9th. So much great work happening out there right now to bring attention to this, and I really hope that this continues and that, maybe this podcast will add a little bit there. I'll do what I can. So please join me in welcoming Deborah Marcus, who is going to talk about her experience in writing The Parent's Survival Guide to PANDAS PANS, and again, help to bring awareness to PANDAS PANS Awareness Day on October 9th. So welcome, Deborah, to the podcast. I'm happy to connect with you today.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful that you could be here. So why don't we start with you providing a bit of a background about you and your family and what led into your new book?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm very honored and touched to be here. So my name is Deborah Marcus, and I live in Austin, Texas, with my husband of 17 years and our 2 teenage daughters. And I grew up in Boston and did my undergrad at Syracuse University and got my MBA at UNC Chapel Hill. And for over 20 years, I was actually in advertising and marketing and brand management. And for a while, I was even executive coach. And last year, I returned to my passion of acting and became an author. And becoming an author was actually something very unexpected when I think about it. My daughter had published a book at the age of 11. And I thought to myself, well, if she can publish a book, well, then I should be able to publish a book. And then I thought, well, what would I want to publish a book about? And it came to me immediately that I could use that book as a way to help other parents who are struggling with PANDAS and PANS.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so how did you come in contact with PANDAS PANS? What is the story around your family and your experience with it, if you don't mind sharing?
So both of my kids actually developed PANS from Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses about 8 years ago. And one subsequently got PANDAS from strep a few years later. So we've been dealing with this illness for quite a while with both of my kids. It was actually in the summer of 2014 when my younger daughter's behavior really began to change, and she started having stomach pains and eye pains. And we saw the pediatrician, who then sent us to the ophthalmologist and then the gastroenterologist and infectious disease and then therapists. And it really wasn't until we spoke with another PANDAS parent that we were able to get direction we needed in order to get a proper diagnosis. And then my second daughter's symptoms started maybe 6 months after the first. And at that point, we were pretty convinced we knew what was going on, but it took a full year to get the diagnosis. And if it wasn't for the gastroenterologist who actually tested my daughter for Lyme disease while she was getting an endoscopy, and then told us to go see a Lyme literate doctor to review the results, which were indeterminate, I don't know that we would have figured this out as quickly. So I'm really grateful for the family friend that, pointed us in the direction of PANDAS and PANS, and also that doctor who was really willing to test for Lyme disease.
Yeah, wow, that's really challenging, and it is such a difficult disorder, because you're right, it can be missed so easily, and I think there are so many different ways in which it presents, and there are so many different ways in which, especially PANS, that it can come to be. And so, yeah, that's something that I hear a lot, is that people have come across a doctor or a friend, there seems to be somewhere that sort of really starts them on the right path. And so I'm really glad for you guys that you were able to find that. And so once you did receive a diagnosis, were you able to move to treatment easily, or how did that path go?
Yeah. So like I said, getting the diagnosis was really the hardest step. And I think a lot of people do struggle with it because what happens is they might see one symptom and then they may misinterpret it as something. So a lot of people have children with eating disorders, or they're diagnosed with eating disorders and they think it's just an eating disorder. But then what will happen is these other diagnoses will start piling up, like anxiety and OCD and then Tourette's. And what will happen is one child will end up having multiple diagnoses from different doctors, and then it'll come together for them at some point, most likely when they hear about PANDAS from another person that has spread the word, that they realize, oh, wait a second, these are related. These aren't individual. These aren't separate. And I think that's really what happens in a lot of the cases, is this sort of piling of symptoms that then comes to a head. And it took us, quite a while to get to the right Lyme literate doctor who was also a PANDAS physician in Connecticut. And once we saw him, he was amazing. I mean, he knew exactly what to test for. He was really knowledgeable about Lyme, the different types of tick-borne illnesses. He knew about mycoplasma. He knew about strep. He knew about PANDAS and PANS inside and out. And he treats people all over the world. So I felt very comfortable. Once we saw him, it was almost like a breath of relief, like, we're going to get on the right track here. We're heading in the right direction. And it was for the first time that you had that glimmer of hope that maybe this is going to turn around, because for the longest time, you really feel like you're really in the depths. It's really awful, the depths of hell. It's really hard. And it really tests your family, your marriage, your relationships. So having that glimmer of hope and getting on the right treatment path just felt so good. And it did take a long time. It's a lot of one step forward, two steps back. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to get treatment. But I will say that the earlier a person gets treatment, the quicker they are more likely to heal.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you were able to find that doctor. I know here in Canada, it can be really challenging because, we have less selection in the doctors that we work with. And so sometimes it can be really difficult to kind of get referred to somebody that can help. But, you're absolutely right. Once that happens, it's so much relief for the parent. And I know that your book focuses a lot on kind of the experience for the parent as well. And that was the biggest thing for me, is kind of having somebody that I felt could actually manage the case, right? Where as a parent, when like you said, you're having so many multiple diagnoses coming at you, it's like, how can you even manage all of these, right?
Yes.
And so you need that help. And I think, what you're doing here with your book is really important and makes a lot of sense. I've talked about it several times on the podcast, but my son does have PANDAS, and he started with his symptoms maybe about the time, I suppose, a little bit later than your children, but kind of a similar timeline. We've been dealing with it for quite a while, and I definitely can feel for you in your experience and how challenging that it is. Why don't we get into a little bit more about that motivation to create your book and how you even set out in terms of such a large topic around a parent survival guide?
Well, I realized when I reflected back on when this journey started for me, there really wasn't a lot of help out there. Mm-hmm. There were some pages. Facebook was on the newer side for me. There weren't a lot of people that knew about it. My pediatrician didn't know about it. So I thought to myself, if I was starting out all over again, what information would I want? And in what format would I want it? And I felt like to provide parents with a very easy to read book that has all the information from, recognizing what's going on with your child and how to get the diagnosis and figure out all the different treatment options, and then go beyond that to provide the support that we often don't have. And I had this idea, and I just sat down one night and just started writing and writing and writing. And mm-hmm. It just kind of flowed. And then I would go back and then I'd say, we need a chapter on this. Oh, wouldn't it be cool if I had a chapter on that? And then it just kind of continued from there. And then I spoke with another PANDAS mom, Melissa Nolan, and she and I met because of PANDAS. And she has a journalism editing background. And I said, how could I make this bigger? How could I make it better? And we started meeting almost every Monday night, and she would give me ideas and suggestions, and then she went on to help edit the book. And she really helped me even grow it bigger from there to make sure that I was incorporating what other moms might need to read or to hear to move forward. And I felt like it really needed to be all-encompassing, letting people know, giving them permission to do self-care, I think a lot of times as caregivers, we lose ourselves in this journey. And when we lose ourselves, it's really hard to take care of everybody else and to take care of our relationships. So I really leaned on that too to help write the book. I think that the book is different also in the sense where it has a whole chapter where children who have this illness explain what it feels like to experience these PANDAS and PANS symptoms and the impact that it's had on their lives. And why this is important is because what is OCD to one child is not necessarily OCD to another child, or a parent might not think of it as OCD. And I think reading different examples and hearing these children in their own words helps parents, even the parents of these children, better understand what their child is going through so that they can help their own child. It gives a lot of practical suggestions on how to deal with things like school refusal, hygiene issues, detoxing, and much more. I mean, a lot of things that for me, it was trying to get this information was a lot of posting on pages or coming across the information on a Facebook page. Mm-hmm. But being able to have a comprehensive place where it's all together, I think makes it easier, and it becomes a reference. It has a very robust resource section to help parents get more information, as well as has information in it that they can share with others who don't quite get it yet. Those who are, maybe a parent who doesn't quite believe the situation that's going on or doesn't quite understand it. And we need to get them on board and help them understand what this looks like. And it really is the type of book that you're going to read and then refer to over and over again as new symptoms or challenges arise, because this disease or this illness, it does flux and change over time. Your child may have one symptom today and a different symptom tomorrow at times. So it does provide you with guidance, and you can look things up in the index and look up your specific topic and go right to an answer. And I think that that's what we need. We need as much help as we can get in one place, because we're all very busy and it's very hard to get away and get help. So to have a guidebook there, I think is really, I hope it's valuable to people. That's why I wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is such a disorder that it can be very all-consuming. Like I know for myself, going through so much research, going through so many different pages, just like, you're constantly going down that rabbit hole of like, well, what about over here? What about this? What about this? Trying to figure it out.
Absolutely.
And it's exhausting because you're also parenting. You're also parenting a child that's, struggling at times, right? So, that seems like something that's really useful and smart to put together. And you're right about the self-care. That's definitely something that I've heard from so many different parents that, a big piece is getting burnt out. Like I remember for myself, it was like I would go, and then I would almost have to like retreat a little bit for a while in terms of seeking new treatments, because the level of appointments and the level of like explaining and trying new things. And then for the child, like they get where they're, like you mentioned, detoxing, or they're doing like all these different protocols and appointments too. And so it's a lot for sure. It's difficult.
Yeah. And it's also a lot for the siblings that don't have PANDAS and PANS. And I really do try to provide guidance in the book on that too, because this disease really impacts everybody in the family. It impacts the sibling relationship. It impacts the parent-child relationship. It impacts the parents' relationships. So I really try to address all of those relationships and provide some help, or at least share what's worked for us to get through it. And how do we, help our non-PANDAS child deal with what their sibling is going through, and how do we keep our family unit intact?
Mm-hmm. And I think, you mentioned that the book, you tried to kind of be all encompassing. And I think that's wonderful, because there are so many different stories. There are so many different ways that it presents in different children. So I think that that's amazing. One thing that I did wonder is, and others might be wondering this, is does the book focus on conventional treatment or do you have some alternative like treatments like homeopathy, or where do you kind of talk about what you sought out, and if there's any direction in there of what you've done?
Yeah. So what I do try to do is provide a range of what treatment options are available out there. So I do talk about traditional medicine, meaning Western medicine with antibiotics. We talk about IVIG. It brings up homeopathy. It brings up LDI, which is low dose immunotherapy. It brings up functional medicine. So I do bring up a range of treatment options because there is a spectrum out there, and what works for one child does not necessarily work for another. And that's the case with my children. In fact, my youngest child does great with antibiotics. My older child, not so much. So for her, it's more functional medicine. The younger one, it's more antibiotic use. We haven't had to do IVIG, so I can't speak specifically to it, but I've shared some thoughts on that. I do not go into great detail as to what treatment looks like specifically in terms of medicines or formulas or things like that, because I am not a medical practitioner, and I do encourage people to seek out help from a medical practitioner to provide that guidance that's specific to their child. But it does provide a lot of guidance in terms of what's out there so that people can know that there's options and they can get the right option for their child.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because also depending on which practitioners are available to you, you know, that can really, this could help people find out where to try next, kind of thing. If maybe not had success. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you brought up a good point, which is that, you know, you may start with one type of treatment, and then you may evolve to another or another. So we started with traditional medicine with my older daughter, and then we switched over to functional medicine to get her farther along. I know other people who have started with LDI and then moved to homeopathy. So it really, I think it's important for people to know that you may start with one treatment, but that treatment may only get you certain distance in this journey, and you might have to switch to something else to bring you the rest of the way or to continue your progress. And that's okay. So I wouldn't think of it as it's one or another, but think of them as options along the journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, definitely. And we've experienced that as well, like different amount of success with different things, and just kind of always trying to peel back and see what's next. So I think, I'm sure a lot of parents will identify with that for sure. One thing I wanted to chat about is, I guess, how you see your book maybe, and you've touched on it a little bit in terms of how you went about writing it, but how you're finding that it's different in terms of, say, compared to some of the other books available on PANDAS PANS or others that are parenting advice on parenting through illness.
Yeah, so I think that this book really does combine advice with stories in a way that helps you to relate and feel connected to a community and feel connected to others that are going through it. Hearing the child's voice, I don't think that exists elsewhere. And really just giving a lot of tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, and things that are probably not even in a book, such as doing infrared saunas and exploring Epsom salt baths and using, Advil or some sort of ibuprofen a couple times a day, 3-4 times a day, for a couple of weeks to help reduce the inflammation. These are all little tips and tricks that often don't make it into the book, but they're so critical for the success of your child, because doctors, they only have a certain period of time with you. And then they say, okay, goodbye, I'll see you in 3 months. But there's nothing out there right now that really can help you on a day-to-day basis. And I really wanted to be all encompassing for that, to make sure that you had something in your pocket that you could bring with you, that you could refer to, that you could help fill the gaps on, so that when things come up, because you can't always just reach back out to the doctor and see them between those visits or get the information or get help. So I wanted it to be more focused in that regard. And it's not just one story. It's not just my story. I took a lot of stories from others in the community and worked with others in the community to share their stories so that people could hear it not just from one person's point of view. They could really hear it from a range of viewpoints.
I think, yeah, that's absolutely great. And then it does get to more of that all-encompassing piece when you're sharing so many stories together. So I think that makes sense. And the children's stories help to make it real. You're right. Like I've heard of a lot of those things maybe on the Facebook groups, like the saunas and, Epsom salt baths and the Advil protocol and all of that type of things. But you're right. Like there's not that many books that really touch on that, at least that I've read. So that does seem great. I wondered if maybe, and you mentioned a few here, but if there are a few of the tools that you would want to share that have been helpful for your family, and then even for you with regard, like you did mention to self-care, like if there are specific things that you would want to share with us.
Sure, definitely. There's a lot of different tools, and there's way more than I can probably even talk about here. So I'll share a few examples. One of them that I brought up was this idea of detoxing. A lot of the physicians, they don't talk about it as much as they really should, how when you're taking these medicines, whether it be traditional or functional or otherwise, your body often is, it's battling the illness, right? And it's killing it off. And the detoxing it's a method to help your body to get rid of that illness or get rid of that, that toxin out of your body faster. So the more we can help our children detox, the better we can help them move along in the journey in a faster manner. And I found that a lot of physicians weren't talking about that, and it wasn't really addressed. So for us, we find that taking Epsom salt baths for 20 minutes, having activated charcoal, infrared sauna treatments, they're great supplements to any treatment to help the body in terms of getting rid of all these toxins. You just have to be careful that when you do these detoxing, that it's separated by about 2 hours from whatever your treatment is. Because if you're taking an antibiotic, you don't want to take that at the exact same time, because that will kill the detox and it actually won't get it out. So you got to separate it. Same thing if you're doing a probiotic, and just making sure that that probiotic doesn't have a certain strain of strep in it, because some of the probiotics do. But when you take those, you have to separate them by 2 hours from a detox or from a medicine, so that it's not killing off what you're trying to put in that's good for your gut. Another thing that I think is helpful is to know that there are ways to help teach children how to swallow pills, because I know that taking medicine can be a huge struggle for these children. Mine really didn't like liquids, so we taught them how to swallow pills, and it was a big, big breakthrough. And I share a great training video link in the book, and it helps the kids take caplets or tablets by using candy. It teaches them how to swallow by increasing the size of candy that they're swallowing. So when I told my kids, hey, do you want to learn how to swallow pills and we're going to just use candy? They were all on board with that. And then getting kids to take caplets or tablets that don't taste good, we will break them up and put them into clear capsules, which you can buy on Amazon or some other stores, health food stores. And you just clear capsules and you put them right in, and then they don't even taste them. So if there's a negative taste, that can help as well. I have a whole chapter in the book that's dedicated to tips and tricks, and it focuses on everything from anxiety and sensory, attending school, how to help with sleep, rages, tantrums. A lot of the ideas I compiled from others in the community, as well as my own experience. And I will also say that bribery is not out of the question. I'm always up for some good bribery. I tell a story in the book about how my daughter was having a hard time getting ready for school. And I told her if she got ready for school, then I would paint a big heart on my cheek for when I drove her to school. And I think she was toward the beginning of her journey. nothing made her go faster. I mean, I rocked the biggest, brightest pink heart on my cheek that day, but it got her to school. So, I know that all the moms out there will do anything to help their child. And this is probably one of the hardest things you're ever going to go through. So I feel like every tip and trick that we can share as a community is just so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen there was a video that was focused on them swallow. They start with like a tic tac for swallowing the pills. Yes, yes. We didn't have tons of success. I'll be honest. My son, we have done like a vitamin drink. We tend to do, and he hates it, but it is what it is. It's like the only way he'll do it. He likes liquid compared to the pill, but the veggie cap sounds interesting too.
Well, there are some kids that do prefer liquid, and that's totally fine. And if they're having trouble with the flavor of liquids, you can also get the pharmacy to flavor them. So that can help as well for those who do want to continue with a liquid, but they don't like the taste.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's a great idea. No, this sounds really practical. And I think that's what people need, right? Like it is so challenging. There are so many different hurdles that you come across. Like even you don't think, you go to the doctor, they're like, oh, get them to take this. You go home and then it's like, you can't get them to take it. So it's things like these suggestions that really help to really put it into practice. And probably, you're echoing so many of the things that people are hearing from doctors, but also sometimes you forget, right?
Yes.
When you mentioned about the detoxing and the hours in between, like I know our naturopath has talked about that, but I know you get in the office and there's times that then you're not remembering everything. So this seems like a great resource to go back to.
Yeah, I also recommend that people, when they go to their doctor's office, that they bring a notebook with them and that they use that notebook to not only track their appointments with their physician, but in between tracking symptoms, making sure you're writing down when you're observing symptoms, and then also tracking meds and whatnot, so that when you get in there, you can take the time with the physician instead of, trying to think about, well, what was the symptom and what did they take? You have it all right there organized, and therefore you can use that time really valuable time to talk about the child and where your child is at and what change in, treatment you may need, or if it's a first visit, examples of the different symptoms that the child is going through. And you have it written out, because it is very easy to get in there and then everything just kind of disappears. It's kind of like that example, have your arm hurts and you go to the doctor and then it doesn't hurt when you're in the office, right? So it's the same thing. You kind of forget, or, it's not there at the time. I also recommend that people take pictures or video of their children when they're having episodes or flares, when they're in the thick of it, so that they can show the physician, because the physician only sees what they see in the office. And if you can share with them a video of your child when your child, really, is having a big moment, it's easier for the physician to see what's going on. Or if you're sharing what you think is OCD or anxiety, you can talk about it and share this video, and it helps the physician even more so to properly diagnose your child.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you're right. Sometimes you get in there and it's just like similar comments that you get from even family members where they're like, oh, well, I saw him on the weekend and he's fine. And you're like, well, no, like.
Yeah, they're always on their best behavior at school or, with other people. Not always. I will take that back. Some children do struggle at school. Mine were very good at school, but the minute that they hit the car, it was like all hell broke loose, and people didn't see outside of the home what I saw in the home. It was sort of like, what do you mean your child is sick? They look great. Not sure what you're talking about. So it comes as a big shock to many people when they do find out that there's an illness. And I think with PANDAS, it can be a hidden illness. And it's hard for other people to grasp it or to believe it at times.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And then what about some of the self-care tools maybe that you've been using?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in self-care, and I know, I will say right up front, I know that it's hard. I know that it's hard to tear yourself away from the child, especially when you have separation anxiety, or they have separation anxiety rather. I know it's difficult, and I know that these days are so long, but self-care is so important. I use the example of when you're on an airplane, right? And they say at the very beginning, in case of an emergency, put your own mask on first and let the oxygen flow before you put on your child's mask. And the same is the case here. So, self-care can come in many different ways, shapes, and forms, depending upon who you are. It literally could be 5 minutes in a bathroom having a good cry. It could be going for a walk. It could be doing exercise. It could be listening to a meditation for 5 minutes, or doing restorative yoga with or without your child. There's all different ways to embrace that self-care. I think what's really most important is that when you need help, you ask for it, that you really get help, whether it be your partner, whether it be a family member that gets it, or a friend that gets it, or find another PANDAS parent in the area or in, nearby that you can lean on, so that you can help each other. Because this is, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you're going to need your energy to get through it. And self-care, I think, it's not selfish. Self-care is important for preservation purposes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those are some really good practical ideas, because I think people get in their head like, oh, when am I going to the spa? Like people, oh, self-care is that kind of thing. And it's like, no, it can be just a couple minutes on your own, or, maybe doing even an errand that you have to do, but, not taking your children with you just so that you can focus and, take a couple minutes. So yeah, there's lots of different ways that it can look, and that makes sense. The bath or whatever it is that you need. That's great.
I used to give my husband a heads up. He would contact me on his way right when he's leaving work, and he'd say, "How's it going?" And I'd say, "It was a rough day. I need you to step in like the minute you get home," so that he had time on his commute home to process whatever he needed to process. And once he walked in the door, I was able to take a break and let him handle things so that I could just have a little downtime. And, and that downtime could be just me making dinner uninterrupted. Yeah. It doesn't have to be like going off. It could it could be something that you're doing, but you're doing it yourself. And maybe you're listening to music while you're doing it. It's literally time alone to be with your thoughts, to recharge, without having the PANDAS child and or the sibling who's frustrated by the PANDAS child, bringing you down and making it tough. And I know that these are all hard suggestions. I recognize that, because I'm in the same shoes as every PANDAS parent. But I do think it's incredibly important to get through this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things that I've over the years kind of appreciated more about PANDAS and PANS is that I often feel, and I'm a bit of a control freak, I guess I would say, I often feel like behind the 8 ball on managing it. Like I always feel a bit reactionary, because you don't necessarily always see the flares coming, right? You don't necessarily know when you're going to end up in that situation. And so it makes self-care so important, because if you've been investing in yourself, even in the times when things are going well, then it's going to pay off when you get into that crunch time as well, where you're just like kind of go with appointments and trying to, help your child as much as you can. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
Absolutely.
Just something. Yeah.
I think what you're suggesting is a really great idea, which is really doing self-care daily. Yeah. So, so that you never get to the point where you're completely depleted, because you don't know when you're going to need that energy. So if you continue to practice self-care, you're going to have reserves to help you get through whenever that bad moment hits. Or bad days hit, or bad weeks hit. It's just that ability to take care of yourself for not just today, but tomorrow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes sense. So I guess before we wrap up, are there any other key pieces of advice or tools or anything else related to the book that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think that really the first and most important step for parents is to find a PANDAS and PANS specialist if they can. I know that this is going to be harder in some areas, in some countries, in some places. There are some great resources out there on PANDAS Network as well as the Aspire website, where they do have a resource where you can put in where you live and they will provide names of PANDAS and PANS specialists that are near you to reach out to. And the reason why this is really important is because it's a really huge uphill battle trying to convince a doctor to treat something that they are not familiar with. Getting the right practitioner, even one that may not take insurance if you're from the US, it's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, and it's going to save you a lot of tears in the long run. Because if you spin your wheels with a lot of different doctors who don't know this illness nor how to treat it, it's going to take you a lot longer. And really, time is of the essence in trying to get your child back and in trying to get your child healthy. So the quicker you can see a specialist who knows what they're dealing with and can help you unpeel all the layers, I think that that's important. You know, when we started, we didn't know what we had exactly, but once we figured out, okay, it's Lyme, and then we figured out, okay, now there's some tick-borne illnesses. Well, we also had other things there. We had mycoplasma, we had mold, we had no idea about, that was down the line, candida issues. So these are all different illnesses that can layer on top of not only strep, but your base illness. And you need a practitioner that's going to be able to peel back all those layers and treat all the different illnesses and really strengthen your child's system so that they can fight and move forward beyond PANDAS and PANS. And I know it can be challenging, but I think that working with the right practitioner really makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. It can be really hard to find and challenging for sure. But yeah, that guidance is wonderful. And yeah, we were similar, like had experience with mold then as well. And that was kind of another piece of the puzzle. And we're using LDI. So a lot of the things that you've mentioned definitely ring true with us. So.
And, I think also joining support groups, go on the Facebook pages, get a support group, get a place where you can vent, a place where you can say, oh, I had the worst day and here's why. And I just need to get it off my chest, because I guarantee you there'll be tons of other parents who are going to write you back and say, hang in there. You got this. I got your back. I'm here for you. And some days that's all we really need. It's really hard to do this alone, and no one should have to go through this alone.
Yeah, no, that the Facebook groups are a great way to find that community, because in your community, you may not know anybody, right, that is dealing with this. And so
this is very true.
Totally agree as well. So how can listeners find out more about you, purchase the book? Where are you on social media?
So, well, you can find the book, The Parent's Survival Guide to PANDAS and PANS, on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. There's a paperback as well as ebook versions currently available. And this podcast comes at a really good time, because I've been working on an audiobook version for the past 6 months, and it's going to be launching in the coming weeks.
Oh, wow.
And it will also be available on Audible and iTunes as well as Amazon. So it's coming. I know I've been asked by quite a few people for it, because I know that especially a PANDAS parent doesn't have a lot of time to sit and read. So this audiobook should provide that gap for those who aren't able to do that. And then in terms of myself, you could find me on most of the PANDAS and PANS Facebook pages. You can look me up there, message me if you have any questions at all. I can also be found on Instagram at dmarcus66.
That's great. Okay. And that audiobook sounds wonderful. That's a great idea. Because you're right. Sometimes you can maybe have it on and in the background or the car or whatever while you're still doing all the many things. That's great.
Yeah, and it was honestly the community that asked for it. I hadn't even considered doing an audiobook, never did an audiobook before. And people in the community said, gosh, is there an audiobook? I could really use an audiobook. And then 30 other people said, I could really use an audiobook. So I said, well, I learned how to write a book. So now I guess I'm going to learn how to do an audiobook. And thanks to the community, we're going to have it soon.
That's great. Oh, wow. That's a good response for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I know we're coming up on PANDAS PANS Awareness Day, October 9th. And so I really wanted to get more information out there. Last year I did a focus, like a month-long focus on PANDAS PANS, and I've interviewed many different practitioners in between. So I just thought it would be great to really bring it to light at this time of year again. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I am just so appreciative. And I hope that this podcast, as well as the book, provides all the parents out there the information that they need. And I hope together we can create awareness, better awareness of this illness, and hopefully get, the community together to push for some resolution and some cures, because it's a really tough illness, and hopefully eventually it'll be eradicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And an easier time for parents would be great, right?
Yeah.
more treatment options and things.
Oh gosh, that would be nice. I'll just say I have a friend, Melissa Nolan, who she's my editor, but she also just launched her own book called Somewhere Out There. And this book is all different stories of people who are sort of farther along in the journey. And it's really great in the sense where it provides hope for those who are really dealing with despair. And I wrote a poem that's in that book that is titled Grateful. And I think it will resonate with a lot of parents and give them hope for the future.
Oh, that's great. That's another great resource for us to look out for. So thank you so much. Have you read my novel Pendulum by S.E. German yet? If not, what are you waiting for? And if you have, I would love to hear from you. If you don't know about Pendulum, it's a heartwarming story about a young boy who starts to experience neuropsychiatric symptoms after an infection. We follow the boy as he goes through many regular, real middle grade issues like moving, having a crush, playing sports, also while experiencing neuropsychiatric symptoms like anxiety, OCD, tics, panic attacks, and more. If you're interested in checking out Pendulum by S.E. German, it is available through Amazon worldwide, where you can even see a preview of the book, or you can listen to Chapter 1, which is on episode 64 of the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. I hope you enjoy the novel, and thanks for your support. Thank you so much to Deborah Marcus for her time today and her wonderful insights on her experience with PANDAS PANS and why she really moved to create the book, The Parent Survival Guide to PANDAS PANS. It sounds wonderful. I think it's a great collection of information that, as parents, it's often all over the place, and it seems like she's done a wonderful job to package that together for us, to make it useful, to make life a little bit less stressful. Again, if you'd like to buy the book, she said it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and that audiobook sounds great that's coming. You can follow her on Instagram at dmarcus66. And also, she did mention another book by Melissa Nolan called Somewhere Out There that's also available on Amazon. I myself wrote a book and released it in 2021 called Pendulum by S.E. German. That is more of a middle grade fiction novel, so not this nonfiction kind of drama, but looking at PANDAS PANS from the perspective of an 11-year-old boy and what life is like with this disorder. So again, you can feel free to buy that, which is also available on Amazon as well. I did want to also highlight some of the episodes that I've done on PANDAS PANS on the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast, because I know that you may come across this episode and think, oh, wow, I'd like to learn more. And the podcast is really a free way to do that. There's been a lot of wonderful experts, parents that have given their time over the last few years to speak with me, and I just would love for you to be able to dive more into some of those episodes, so that you can keep learning, or maybe find somebody else that you're interested to connect to through the podcast. So one of them that I would draw your attention to is episode 50, PANDAS PANS Fundamentals with Dr. Scott and Dr. Ellen Antoine. Also, episode 52, A Parental Perspective of PANDAS PANS. That's with Marnie and Richard Deshane. In episode 55, I talk about my book, Pendulum by S.E. German, and do a Q&A. Then in episode 59, I talk with Dr. Roseanne Capana-Hodge on treating PANDAS, PANS, and Lyme. In episode 64, I talk about some of the PANDAS PANS options that I was looking into at the time. It's more of a personal episode, but then also read chapter 1 of my book, Pendulum by S.E. German. And then in episode 65, I talk with Dr. Jennifer Baer about homeopathic treatment of PANDAS and PANS. Then last October 2021, I did a 4-part series on PANDAS PANS for October to bring awareness to PANDAS PANS. So episode 87 is I Am Not Alone, PANDAS PANS Awareness Day 2021 with Gabriella True, which I mentioned at the top of the podcast. Episode 88 was Brain Inflamed with Dr. Kenneth Bach. Episode 89 was Break the Mold with Dr. Jill Christa, where we learned about how mold can really be a big piece in PANDAS PANS. And then in episode 90, I did a recap of a lot of what we had learned, and then some of my own personal reflections as well. And then I had another episode in the beginning of 2022, episode 103, Supporting PANDAS, PANS, and Chronic Illness Naturally with Erin Darling. So honestly, just going through all of that, I'm a little overwhelmed of the number of conversations and, like I said, experts and parents that have given their time in order to spread awareness of these disorders and the challenges that go along with them. So again, please do what you can on October 9th. I'll be wearing one of my PANDAS PANS Awareness Days hoodies. I have 3 now, so pretty excited of which one I'll pick. Maybe I'll just wear one each day of the weekend, and then bringing awareness through putting things up on social media that day, of course. And then, like I said, look for some of those buildings that will be lighting up, and feel free to even just spend a few minutes on a website learning a little bit more about PANDAS PANS, so that you can know what to look for with your own children or adults. It's also a disorder that is prevalent in adults as well. And also being able to have awareness for those people that you know that may be working their way through these disorders. So thanks again, and I hope you have a great week and are able to bring awareness on October 9th for PANDAS PANS Awareness Day. Are you interested in having a published author speak in your classroom or at your community event? I'd be interested in speaking about my new novel, Pendulum by S.E. German, the writing process, mental health, PANDAS PANS, podcasting, and more. Contact me at reallifeprojectco@gmail.com for both in-person and online bookings. Thank you for listening to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. Please keep in mind, this podcast is not intended to be medical or professional advice. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can follow me on social media, Instagram and TikTok at Sarah Lady Gluten, or Facebook, Sarah_gluten-free lady. You can also visit my website, which includes author information, speaking information, and more info on the podcast at www.se ko-german.com. If you like the podcast, please feel free to review the podcast on your favorite platform and also subscribe, because it means that it will show up for you every week on your favorite podcast platform. Also, we've just started to have the ability to support the podcast. You can find this link in my Instagram bio or visit Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/learning to slay the beasts. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.